In 1955, the average American kitchen turned out dessert almost every single night. Not from a box, from a bowl, a memory, and whatever the pantry held. Every state had its own. Number 14 was so rich that one Colorado church rationed it to a single square per family. Number 3 hides an ingredient that pastry chefs now pay $12 a jar for. And number 1 started as a baker's mistake that nobody could stop eating. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 50 forgotten desserts Americans grew up eating, one from every state. Number 50, Prune Whip, California. Before California grew almonds and avocados for the whole world, it grew prunes, endless orchards of them across the Santa Clara Valley. And every home economics teacher in the state taught girls to turn those wrinkled, dried plums into something that looked like a cloud. Your grandmother would stew a handful of prunes soft, mash them into a dark, sweet pulp, then fold that pulp into stiff, beaten egg whites until the whole bowl doubled in size and turned pale purple. Some baked it in a slow oven until it set like a soufflé. Some served it cold with a thin custard poured around it. A box of prunes cost about a dime and made dessert for the whole family with 2 eggs from the yard. Nobody makes prune whip now because we decided prunes were something for old people, not something you whipped into a treat. But in a California farmhouse in 1940, this was Sunday. Number 49, Cactus Candy, Arizona. This one is almost impossible to find today, and that is a shame because it was one of the strangest and most beautiful sweets in America. Arizona homesteaders and later roadside tourist stands took the pads and fruit of the prickly pear and the pulp of the barrel cactus, cut it into cubes, soaked it in water to draw out the bitterness, then simmered it slowly in heavy sugar syrup for 2 days until the flesh turned translucent and jewel-like. Rolled in coarse sugar, it looked like frosted glass, ruby red or pale green, and it tasted like nothing else, faintly floral, chewy, sweet with a whisper of the desert. Sold in little wooden boxes at gas stations along Route 66, a box cost $0.25 and was mailed home to relatives back east as proof you had really seen the desert. The knowledge of how to prepare cactus without the tiny spines disappeared. What was once a genuine regional craft became a curiosity, and then it became nothing at all. Number 48, Possum Pie, Arkansas. There is no possum in possum pie, and that is the whole joke. Ozark cooks named it that because the pie plays possum, it fools you. On top, it looks like a plain chocolate pie, but underneath the dark layer hides a secret. First, a crust of crushed pecans and butter pressed into the pan. Then a layer of sweetened cream cheese, whipped smooth and white. Then chocolate pudding, thick and dark. Then a crown of real whipped cream and a scatter of more pecans. 4 layers, each one different, revealed only when you cut into it. It cost almost nothing. A block of cream cheese, a box of pudding, a handful of nuts off the tree in the yard. Cold from the icebox on a hot Arkansas afternoon, it disappeared before the fried chicken did. People stopped making it when store-bought pie showed up in the freezer case, and the trick, the whole delight of the thing, was forgotten. Number 47, Grape Nut Pudding, Rhode Island. This is the dessert that lived on the spinning pie case of every diner in Rhode Island and southern New England, and almost nowhere else on earth. It sounds like a mistake and tastes like a hug. Your grandmother would soak a cup of grape nut cereal in milk until the hard little nuggets softened, then stir them into a plain baked custard of eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla. She baked it in a water bath until it set, and as it cooked, something wonderful happened. The cereal floated up and formed a chewy, toasted layer on top, while the custard stayed silky underneath. A dusting of nutmeg finished it. A box of grape nuts cost about 15 cents and made pudding for a week, thrifty New England genius that turned breakfast cereal into a warm, comforting dessert. Outside of Rhode Island, most Americans have never heard of it. Inside Rhode Island, grown adults still get a little emotional at the sight of it. Number 46. Rosettes, Minnesota. In the Scandinavian farm kitchens of Minnesota, Christmas did not truly begin until the rosette iron came down off its hook. It was a strange tool, a long metal handle with a decorative iron mold shaped like a flower or a star screwed onto the end. Your grandmother would heat that iron in hot oil until it sizzled, dip it into a thin batter of eggs, milk, flour, and sugar, then plunge it back into the oil. In seconds, a paper-thin, lacy cookie formed around the iron and slipped free, crisp and golden and impossibly delicate. Dusted with powdered snow-white sugar, a plate of rosettes looked like a pile of frozen flowers. Making them took patience and a steady hand. Norwegian and Swedish grandmothers made hundreds every December, filling tins that lasted through the holidays. When those grandmothers passed, the irons went into junk drawers, and a beautiful, fragile tradition nearly went with them. Number 45. Peppernuts, Kansas. The Mennonite farmers who settled the Kansas plains brought their turkey red wheat, and they brought pfeffernusse, which everyone eventually just called peppernuts. These were tiny, hard, spiced cookies, no bigger than a marble, flavored with cinnamon, cloves, anise, and a genuine pinch of black pepper that gave them their name and a warm little bite at the finish. Your grandmother rolled the stiff dough into long ropes, chilled them, then cut them into hundreds of pea-sized pieces and baked them until they were crunchy all the way through. The whole family sat around the table cutting, an assembly line of aunts and children. That was half the fun. Stored in a tin, they kept for months and were eaten by the handful all winter, rattling in coat pockets on the way to church. A batch used a nickel's worth of flour and spice and made what felt like a bushel of cookies. This was frugality turned into a celebration. Today, the irons and the rolling boards sit in Kansas historical museums, and only a few families still spend a whole December afternoon making them. Number 44. Kolaches, Nebraska. Where the Czech immigrants settled the eastern Nebraska prairie, they built towns around the beet fields and the railroad, and in every one of those towns there was a bakery, and in every bakery there were kolaches. A kolache is a pillow of sweet yeast dough with a well pressed into the center, and into that well went a spoonful of thick fruit, prune, apricot, poppy seed, or a sweet farmer's cheese, then a crumble of buttery streusel on top. Baked golden, they were soft enough to tear apart with your fingers and just sweet enough for breakfast or an afternoon coffee. In the 1950s, a dozen from the town bakery cost a quarter, but most Czech grandmothers made their own, and a Nebraska farm kitchen on baking day smelled like heaven, yeast, and stewed prunes and warm butter. The whole rhythm of a bohemian community ran on these little pastries. As the old bakeries closed and the young people moved to the cities, the kolache faded to a festival food, a thing you drove to Wilbur once a year to remember. Number 43. Basque cake, Nevada. Almost nobody thinks of Nevada as having a food tradition, but tucked into the high desert towns of the north are the descendants of the Basque shepherds who came to tend sheep in the empty ranges. They brought gâteau basque, a dense, buttery cake with a secret inside. Your grandmother would press a rich, almond-scented shortbread dough into a pan, spoon in a layer of thick vanilla pastry cream or dark cherry preserves, cover it with more dough, and bake it until the top turned deep gold and cracked. Cut into it and the soft custard oozed out of the crumbly cake. The Basque boarding houses of Winnemucca and Elko served it at the end of long family-style dinners, after the lamb and the beans and the red wine. It was a shepherd's dessert, made to fill a working man who had been alone in the mountains for months. As the boarding houses vanished and the herding life ended, the cake survived mostly in the ovens of a few devoted families who refused to let their grandmother's recipe disappear. Number 42. Applets and Kotlets. Washington. In the little apple town of Kashmir, Washington, two Armenian immigrants who had survived unspeakable things started an orchard, and when the market for fresh fruit collapsed, they turned to a candy from the old country to survive. Applets and Kotlets were soft, chewy squares of pure fruit. Apples cooked down with walnuts for the applets, apricots for the Kotlets, set with a little gelatin and rolled in powdered sugar. They tasted like concentrated sunshine, sweet and tender, with the crunch of the nuts inside. For most of the 20th century, a box of applets and Kotlets was the souvenir you brought home from a trip through Washington's apple country, sold at fruit stands along the highway for $1 or $2. They were Turkish delight reinvented in an American orchard, a piece of survival and hope turned into candy. Fewer people buy them now, and a whole generation of children has never tasted one, but for anyone who grew up in the Pacific Northwest, that powdered sugar box is pure nostalgia. Number 41. Sour Cream Raisin Pie, South Dakota. On the Dakota Plains, when the garden was buried under snow and the fresh fruit was long gone, a pie still appeared on the Sunday table, and it was made almost entirely from what sat in the pantry year-round. Sour cream raisin pie starts with raisins simmered soft, then folded into a spiced custard rich with sour cream, sugar, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, poured into a crust and baked until it just set, then crowned with a tall meringue browned in the oven. It was tangy and sweet and deeply spiced. It was so common at Lutheran and Norwegian funerals across the northern plains that in some towns they simply called it funeral pie, because it was what the church ladies brought when someone died. A pie cost pennies and used no fresh ingredient at all. Today, most Americans have never even heard of it, and outside the Dakotas and Minnesota, you will not find it on a single menu. First pattern break. Here is what almost every dessert on this list so far has in common, and it is worth stopping to notice. Not one of them required money. They required a grandmother who knew how to turn nothing into something. Prunes, raisins, cereal, cactus, day-old fruit, a scoop of sour cream. These were not the desserts of wealthy people. They were the sweet endings that poor and working families invented so their children would have something to look forward to at the end of a hard day. And that is exactly why they disappeared. The moment America got rich enough to buy dessert at the store, we did. We traded the rosette iron for a bag of Oreos and the prune whip for a tub of Cool Whip, and we told ourselves it was progress. But something left the kitchen when those recipes did. The skill left, the ritual left, and the particular pride of a woman who could make a table full of children gasp with nothing but sugar and eggs, that left too. Number 40. Calais, Louisiana. Before the beignets took over New Orleans, there were Calais, and for over a century they were the true taste of a Creole morning. A challah is a rice fritter, made from leftover cooked rice mixed with flour, eggs, sugar, and a little nutmeg, then dropped by the spoonful into hot fat until it puffed golden and crisp on the outside, soft and sweet within. Dusted with powdered sugar and eaten hot, they were sold on the streets of the French Quarter by Creole women who carried them in covered baskets, calling out "Belle Calasse, tout chaud." Their voices were part of the sound of the city at dawn. A plate of calasse and a cup of chicory coffee was breakfast, and for the women who sold them, it was often the money that bought their own freedom. When the packaged donut and the tourist beignet took over, the challah nearly vanished. It is one of the most historically important desserts in America and one of the most forgotten. Number 39, Needham's, Maine. Down east in Maine, the great secret ingredient in the beloved Christmas candy was, of all things, a potato. Needham's are soft, sweet chocolate-covered candies, and the filling is made by mashing a small boiled potato with powdered sugar, coconut, and a little salt until it turns into a dense white paste. The potato adds no flavor at all. It just makes the filling smooth and holds it together, an old trick from a time when a woman used what she had in the root cellar to stretch expensive sugar and coconut. The paste was pressed into a pan, cut into squares, and dipped in dark chocolate until each piece was sealed shut. Named, the story goes, for a traveling preacher, Needham's appeared in every Maine kitchen at the holidays and in the glass cases of little candy shops in Portland and Bangor. Most people who eat one today have no idea there is a potato inside, and most Maine grandchildren never learn to make them, which means this quiet, clever candy is slipping away. Number 38, Joe Frogger's, Massachusetts. In the old seaport town of Marblehead, Massachusetts, there was a cookie built for sailors, and it was the size of a saucer. Joe Frogger's were huge, chewy molasses cookies, dark and spicy, made with a good slug of rum and plenty of ginger and cloves. The rum and molasses were not just for flavor, they were preservatives. These cookies were baked to survive months at sea in a sailor's sack without going hard or stale, coming home from a fishing voyage as soft as the day they were made. The name, so the town says, came from a man called Old Joe, who lived by a frog pond and whose wife baked them big and round like the lily pads. Marblehead grandmothers baked them for generations, and the smell of molasses and rum meant home to men who had been on the cold Atlantic for far too long. Beyond that one stretch of Massachusetts coast, almost no one remembers them now. Number 37, Huguenot Torte, South Carolina. In Old Charleston, the fine end to a fine dinner was a Huguenot Torte named for the French Protestants who fled to the Carolina Low Country, though the recipe itself is pure American ingenuity. Despite the fancy name, it could not be simpler. A thin batter of eggs, sugar, and a little flour poured over a mix of chopped tart apples and pecans, then baked until the top rose and cracked into a crackly, caramelized crust, while the inside stayed chewy and moist with fruit and nuts. Broken into pieces and topped with a spoonful of whipped cream, it was the dessert served at Charleston dinner parties and in the grand old hotels for most of the 20th century. A whole torte cost very little, a couple of apples and a handful of pecans off a low country tree, but it tasted rich and refined and special. As Charleston's old restaurants closed and tastes changed, the Huguenot Torte drifted out of memory, remembered now mostly by grandmothers who still guard the yellowed recipe card. Number 36, Charlotte Russe, New York. For working-class kids in Brooklyn and the Bronx in the first half of the 20th century, winter had a specific taste, and it came in a little cardboard cup. A Charlotte Russe was a small round of sponge cake set in the bottom of a frilled paper and cardboard holder, topped with a tall swirl of real whipped cream and a single maraschino cherry. The magic was in the holder. It had a cardboard bottom you pushed up with your thumb as you ate, forcing the cake and cream up so you could eat it without a spoon walking down the street. Candy stores sold them for a nickel, but only in the cold months, because the whipped cream would not last in summer heat. To a Depression-era city child, a Charlotte Russe was pure luxury purchased with a single found coin. Every old New Yorker of a certain age lights up at the words. The little cardboard holders disappeared, the candy stores closed, and one of the great cheap joys of the American city vanished almost completely. Number 35, bizcochitos, New Mexico. Long before New Mexico was a state, its people were making bizcochitos, the anise-scented shortbread cookie so beloved that New Mexico eventually made it the official state cookie. The first state in the Union to name one. Your grandmother made these with lard, real lard, which is what gives them their tender, crumbly, melt-in-the-mouth texture, along with sugar, a splash of brandy or wine, and a generous amount of anise seed that perfumes the whole kitchen. The dough was rolled and cut, often into little fleur-de-lis shapes, then dusted with cinnamon sugar before baking. No celebration in a Hispano or Pueblo New Mexican family was complete without tins of them stacked in the kitchen. A batch was cheap and enormous, feeding an entire extended family through the holidays. This is one of the few desserts on this list that is not fully forgotten, held on to fiercely by New Mexican families, but for the rest of America, the bizcochito remains a delicious secret hiding in the high desert. Number 34, Sonker, North Carolina. Deep in the foothills of Surry County, North Carolina, and almost nowhere else, they make a dessert called a sonker, and even most North Carolinians have never heard of it. A sonker is a cobbler, but bigger, deeper, and sloppier, baked in a great big pan to feed a crowd of farmhands after a day of work. It could be made with sweet potatoes, or berries, or peaches, or whatever the season gave, all piled under or over a soft biscuit-like batter and baked until bubbling. But the real signature was the dip, a warm, sweetened milk sauce, almost a thin custard, poured over each serving at the table. A sonker cost next to nothing and stretched to feed everyone twice. It was communal food, harvest food, the sweet reward at the end of tobacco season. The tradition got so close to disappearing that the local county created a sonker trail to keep it alive. Outside those few Carolina hills, the word means nothing, and the dessert is one of America's most endangered secrets. Number 33, Kuchen, North Dakota. The German Russians who homesteaded the North Dakota prairie brought with them a custard cake so beloved that it became the official state dessert. Kuchen, which simply means cake in German, is a sweet yeast dough crust, rolled thin and pressed into a pan, filled with a rich custard of cream, eggs, and sugar, and studded with fruit, prunes, apples, peaches, or rhubarb from the garden. Baked until the custard just trembles and the edges brown, then dusted with cinnamon sugar. It is somewhere between a pie, a cake, and a tart, and it is unforgettable. On the isolated northern plains, Kuchen was the centerpiece of every gathering, every wedding, every Sunday. A grandmother might bake 6 or 8 at a time, and the whole community judged a woman partly by her Kuchen. It cost almost nothing beyond eggs and cream from the farm, and it fed the soul as much as the body. As the small prairie churches closed, the Kuchen tradition thinned, surviving now mostly in family reunions and a handful of small-town cafes. Number 32, Marionberry Pie, Oregon. In the Willamette Valley of Oregon in 1956, agricultural scientists crossed 2 blackberries and created a new one, dark, glossy, tart, and intense, and named it the Marionberry after the county where it was grown. For the next several decades, it was the pride of Oregon, and the Marionberry pie was its crowning glory. Your grandmother would pile those deep purple-black berries into a crust, sweeten them just enough to tame the tartness, dot them with butter, and bake the pie until the juice bubbled up dark and thick and stained the golden crust. The smell of a Marionberry pie cooling on the windowsill was the smell of an Oregon summer. Served warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting into the crimson juice, it was the taste of the Pacific Northwest itself. The berries were often free, gathered wild along country roads or grown in the backyard. As farms consolidated and frozen fruit from far away filled the grocery stores, the specific, glorious Marionberry pie faded, and a whole generation of children grew up thinking blackberries just came in a bag. Number 31, Huckleberry Buckle, Montana. In Montana, they say you cannot buy a real huckleberry, and it is true. The wild mountain huckleberry refuses to be farmed. It grows only high in the forests, and every summer, Montana families climbed into the mountains with buckets and stained fingers to gather them, competing with the bears who loved them just as much. What they carried home became a huckleberry buckle, a humble coffee cake batter poured into a pan, scattered with those precious dark berries, and topped with a crumbly streusel of butter, sugar, and flour. As it baked, the cake rose up around the heavy berries, and the top buckled and cracked, which is where the funny name comes from. This was the reward for a day of hard climbing, eaten warm with coffee while the whole cabin smelled of wild fruit and butter. Because the berries cannot be commercialized, the huckleberry buckle never went national, and outside the northern Rockies, it remains almost completely unknown, a true taste of a place that cannot be shipped anywhere. Second pattern break. Notice something about the last handful: Marionberry, huckleberry, sour orange, wild chokecherry. These desserts existed because a specific fruit grew in a specific place, and the people there built a tradition around it. That is the real story of American dessert, before trucks and freezers made every fruit available everywhere all year long. Your great-grandmother did not make huckleberry buckle because she read it in a magazine. She made it because the huckleberries were ripe on the mountain that week and would be gone the next, and if she did not put them up in a buckle right now, they were lost. Every one of these desserts is a calendar, a map, and a memory folded together, and when the grocery store made strawberries available in January and blackberries available from a bag, we quietly stopped noticing what grew where we actually lived. We gained convenience. We lost the sweetness of a thing that only came once a year, in one place, from one grandmother's hands. Number 30, Baked Alaska, Alaska. When the United States bought Alaska from Russia in 1867, the fashionable restaurant Delmonico's in New York invented a showstopper of a dessert to celebrate the frozen new territory and named it Baked Alaska. The trick of it was pure theater, and it seemed to defy the laws of nature. A block of ice cream was set on a base of sponge cake, then the whole thing was covered thickly in fluffy meringue and slid into a blazing hot oven or torched at the table until the meringue browned while the ice cream inside stayed frozen solid. The meringue insulated the ice cream, hot outside, cold within, a little miracle you could eat. For most of the 20th century, Baked Alaska was the grand finale of a special dinner, wheeled out flaming for anniversaries and New Year's Eve, the kind of dessert that made children gasp. As restaurants stopped doing tableside drama and home cooks lost the confidence to try, Baked Alaska became a museum piece, remembered fondly but almost never made. Number 29, Sour Orange Pie, Florida. Everyone knows key lime pie, but before it there was sour orange pie, the true old Florida dessert, and hardly anyone remembers it. The early Florida settlers had sour orange trees, the bitter Seville oranges the Spanish had planted centuries before, growing wild in their yards. The fruit was too sour and bitter to eat, but its juice made a magnificent pie. Your grandmother would whisk that tart juice into sweetened condensed milk and egg yolks, exactly the way it is done with key limes, pour it into a crust, and bake it until it set into a smooth, custardy filling that was tangy and sweet all at once, crowned with meringue. Sweetened condensed milk was the secret ingredient across Old Florida, because before refrigeration, fresh milk spoiled fast in the heat, but a can lasted forever. The pie cost almost nothing when the oranges grew free in the yard. As the wild sour orange trees were cut down for development and the key lime pie became the tourist favorite, sour orange pie quietly disappeared, a piece of real Florida heritage most residents have never even tasted. Number 28. Bumpy Cake, Michigan. In Detroit, there was one cake, and it came from one place, and every child who grew up in that city knew it by heart. Sanders, the beloved Detroit confectioner, made the bumpy cake, and the bumps were the whole point. It was a devil's food chocolate cake, but across the top, before the fudge went on, the bakers piped long ridges, or bumps, of rich vanilla buttercream. Then, the entire cake was coated in Sanders's famous dark fudge frosting, which settled over the buttercream ridges so the finished cake had a rippled, bumpy top, and every slice held a thick vein of that cool buttercream running through the chocolate. Detroit families bought bumpy cakes for every birthday, every celebration, every ordinary Sunday, and the pink Sanders box on the kitchen counter meant something good was about to happen. Generations of Michigan grandparents have deep, specific memories of it. Outside of Southeast Michigan, almost no one has ever heard of a bumpy cake, and even there, it has become a treat of nostalgia rather than the everyday celebration it once was. Number 27. Fried Pies, Oklahoma. Across Oklahoma and the surrounding southern plains, the fried pie was the perfect handheld dessert, and it lived at gas stations, roadside stands, and every farmhouse kitchen. Your grandmother would take dried fruit, apples, apricots, or peaches, and cook it down soft and sweet with a little sugar and cinnamon. Then she rolled out a round of pie dough, spooned the thick fruit onto one half, folded it over into a half moon, crimped the edge shut with a fork, and dropped it into hot lard until it blistered golden and crisp on both sides. What came out was a crackling, flaky little pocket with hot, sweet fruit inside, sturdy enough to wrap in wax paper and carry in a pocket or a lunch pail. Dried fruit was the key, keeping all year so a fried pie could be made in the dead of winter when nothing fresh existed. For working people and farm kids, a fried pie was a whole meal's worth of joy. The great old fried pie stands are mostly gone now, and the homemade ones with them. Number 26. Atomic Cake, Illinois. On the south side of Chicago, and in its old ethnic neighborhoods, the most impressive cake at any celebration was the atomic cake, and it was a monster of indulgence. It was a towering layer cake, but each layer was different. That was the genius of it. One layer of banana cake with sliced fresh bananas, one of yellow cake with strawberries, one of chocolate, all bound together with custard and whipped cream, and often a layer of that whipped cream and pudding filling Chicago bakeries were famous for. The whole thing was frosted in more whipped cream and sometimes drizzled with chocolate. It was light and heavy at once, 3 or 4 desserts stacked into one, and it was the cake you ordered from the corner bakery for a first communion, a graduation, a wedding shower. Chicago families of Polish, Italian, and Bohemian roots all claimed it. As the neighborhood bakeries that made them closed one by one, the atomic cake became harder and harder to find, and a grand, joyful piece of Chicago's dessert history began slipping into memory. Number 25, Peanut Butter Rolls, West Virginia. In the coal country hollows of West Virginia, Christmas candy meant peanut butter rolls, and once again, the secret ingredient was a humble potato. Your grandmother boiled and mashed a small potato, then beat in powdered sugar, cup after cup, until the mixture turned into a stiff, sweet, white fondant, using the potato's moisture to bind pounds of sugar for pennies. She rolled that fondant out flat like a pie crust, spread it thick with peanut butter, then rolled it up tight into a log like a jelly roll. Sliced into pinwheels, each piece showed a beautiful spiral of white sugar and brown peanut butter. It was sweet, dense, and rich, the kind of candy a coal miner's family could afford to make in quantity when store candy was out of reach. Every family had their tin of peanut butter rolls at Christmas, and every grandmother swore hers was best. It was Depression-era ingenuity turned into a beloved holiday tradition. As money got easier and store candy got cheaper, the potato-based rolls faded, though a few Appalachian families still make them every December to honor the ones who came before. Number 24. Potato candy. Idaho. Idaho is the potato state, so it is only right that Idaho claims the sweet that turns the humble spud into dessert. Potato candy is a cousin of the West Virginia rolls, but simpler and even more magical to a child. You take a single small boiled potato, mash it smooth, and then something almost unbelievable happens. As you beat in powdered sugar, the potato liquefies and then thickens into a pliable white dough that can absorb what seems like an endless amount of sugar. Roll it flat, spread it with peanut butter, roll it up and slice it into spirals. That one little potato, worth a fraction of a cent, produces a whole platter of candy. Idaho grandmothers made it to show children the wonder of it as much as to feed them, the amazement on a kid's face when a potato became candy. It cost almost nothing and required no baking, so children could help. Like so many thrift desserts, it faded when candy became something you simply bought. But the trick is too delightful to let die. Number 23. Green Jell-O Salad, Utah. Utah loves lime Jell-O so much that the state sits at the heart of what Americans jokingly call the Jell-O Belt. And green Jell-O salad is not a joke there, it is a genuine tradition served at every funeral, ward potluck, and family dinner. Your grandmother would dissolve a box of lime Jell-O, then fold in an unlikely and beloved combination: crushed pineapple, small curd cottage cheese, sometimes shredded carrot, chopped walnuts, or a swirl of whipped topping to make it creamy. Poured into a mold and chilled until firm, it came out jiggling, pale green, studded with fruit and nuts, somewhere between a salad and a dessert, and fully committed to being neither. To outsiders, it sounds strange. To generations of Utah children, it tastes like home, like Grandma's house, like every gathering of the family. In an era before every treat came from a store, this cool, wobbly, colorful creation was a marvel of the modern refrigerator. It is fading now as tastes change, but in Utah, the green Jell-O still wobbles on. Number 22. Apple Cider Donuts, New Hampshire. Autumn in New Hampshire has a flavor, and it is the apple cider donut, hot from the fryer at a country cider mill. When the apples came in and the presses ran, the mills would boil down fresh cider until it was thick and intense, then work that concentrated cider right into a cake donut batter along with cinnamon and nutmeg. Fried until the outside was crisp and the inside stayed tender and moist, then tumbled while still hot in cinnamon sugar, these donuts carried the deep, tart, sweet flavor of real apples in every bite. Families made a whole day of it, driving out to the mill on a crisp Saturday, watching the cider press and eating warm donuts from a paper bag while the leaves turned red and gold overhead. For New England children, the apple cider donut was fall itself. Grandmothers made them at home too, filling the kitchen with the smell of frying and spice. The old cider mills are fewer now, and the homemade version has grown rare, but the smell still stops anyone who remembers it in their tracks. Number 21. Crumb cake. New Jersey. In the Italian and German bakeries of New Jersey, the crumb cake was not a cake with a little topping. It was a topping with a little cake underneath, and that was exactly right. Your grandmother, or the corner bakery, would bake a thin layer of soft, buttery, yellow cake, and then bury it under an inch or more of crumb. Big, tender clumps of butter, sugar, flour, and cinnamon worked together by hand into knuckle-sized crumbs. The whole thing was baked until the crumbs were set but still soft, then buried under a snowstorm of powdered sugar. Cut into big squares, a piece of Jersey crumb cake was more crumb than cake, sweet and rich, and impossibly good with a cup of coffee. It appeared at every Sunday breakfast, every wake, every family visit, and a box tied with string was how you showed up to someone's house properly. As those old bakeries closed and the supermarket version, dry and thin, took over, real Jersey crumb cake, with the crumb piled sky-high, became something you had to search for. Third pattern break. Here is the part the food companies would rather you did not dwell on. Every single dessert on this list was invented by ordinary people, and then, one by one, a factory made a worse version, put it in a package, and sold it back to us. The crumb cake became a cellophane-wrapped snack. The donut came in a waxed box. The Jell-O salad became a plastic cup. The whipped cream became a spray can. And here is the thing they counted on. Once your grandmother stopped making the real one, you forgot what the real one even tasted like, so the cheap imitation seemed fine. That is how a tradition dies. Not all at once, but in the slow trade of the homemade for the convenient, the specific for the generic, the loving for the fast. The recipes on this list survived only because a few stubborn people refused to make the trade. And every time one of them dies without teaching a grandchild, a little more of the real America goes with them. Number 20, Scotcheroos, Iowa. Somewhere in the church basements and school bake sales of Iowa in the 1960s, the Scotcheroo was born, and it became the unofficial dessert of the entire upper Midwest. It starts on the stovetop, no baking required, which is part of why every busy farm wife had it memorized. You melt sugar and corn syrup together, stir in a big scoop of peanut butter, then fold in Rice Krispies until every crisp is coated and sticky. Pressed into a pan, then topped with a melted mixture of butterscotch and chocolate chips, smoothed over the top, and cut into bars once set. The result is chewy and crunchy at once, sweet, salty, peanut buttery, with that smooth butterscotch chocolate layer on top. Scotcheroos cost almost nothing and made a huge pan, which is exactly why they showed up at every potluck, funeral, ball game, and Sunday school class from Iowa to the Dakotas. The recipe traveled on the side of the cereal box and in 1,000 handwritten church cookbooks. They are still made in the heartland, but for much of the country, the humble Scotcheroo remains a forgotten Midwestern treasure. Number 19, Snickerdoodles. Connecticut, New England, and Connecticut in particular, lays claim to the Snickerdoodle, that soft cinnamon sugar cookie with the funny name and the crackled top. What set a real Snickerdoodle apart from an ordinary sugar cookie was one old-fashioned ingredient, cream of tartar. Your grandmother added it to the dough, and it did two things. It gave the cookie a subtle tang, and it reacted to make the top crackle and crinkle as it baked. Rolled in cinnamon sugar before going in the oven, the cookies spread and cracked, and came out chewy in the center with slightly crisp edges. The name itself is a piece of pure New England whimsy, possibly from a German word, possibly just invented for fun. Snickerdoodles were after-school cookies, lunchbox cookies, the ones a grandmother always seemed to have ready. They have survived better than most on this list, but the true version, made with cream of tartar for that unmistakable tang and crackle, is quietly being replaced by lazier recipes that miss the whole point. Number 18, maple cream pie, Vermont. In Vermont, where the sugar maples run every spring and syrup is practically a second currency, the great local dessert was maple cream pie. Your grandmother took the real thing, dark amber Vermont maple syrup boiled down from the family's own trees, and cooked it into a silky custard with cream, eggs, and a little cornstarch until it thickened into a filling the color of caramel. Poured into a crust and chilled, then topped with real whipped cream, it captured the pure, deep flavor of the maple woods in a single slice, sweet but complex, with that unmistakable woodsy maple note that no imitation syrup can touch. During sugaring season, when the sap houses ran day and night and the smell of boiling syrup hung over the whole valley, the maple cream pie was the reward. As small family sugar houses gave way to big producers and cheap corn syrup pancake toppings fooled a generation into forgetting what maple tastes like, the true maple cream pie became a rare and precious thing. Number 17, blackberry jam cake, Kentucky. In the Kentucky hills, the holiday cake, the one that meant Christmas was truly here, was the blackberry jam cake. It began in summer, when the family picked wild blackberries along the fence rows and put them up as jam, saving jars specifically for this cake. Come winter, your grandmother stirred that dark, seedy jam into a rich spice batter full of cinnamon, cloves, allspice, and buttermilk, along with raisins and chopped nuts, and baked it into deep, moist layers the color of mahogany. Then came the crowning glory, a caramel icing cooked on the stovetop from butter, brown sugar, and cream, poured over the cake while still warm so it soaked in and set into a fudgy, sweet shell. A slice was dense and spiced and unforgettable, the taste of a whole year's patience, from summer picking to winter baking. It was the centerpiece of the Appalachian Christmas table. Making it took a full day and real skill, especially that temperamental caramel icing. As families scattered and store cakes got easy, the blackberry jam cake, with its long summer to winter story, became one of the most treasured and endangered desserts in the mountains. Number 16, chess pie, Tennessee. Chess pie is the pie of the rural South, and Tennessee holds it especially dear, a pie invented out of pure nothing that tastes like far more than the sum of its parts. The whole filling is sugar, butter, eggs, and a spoonful of cornmeal or flour to set it, sometimes a splash of vinegar or buttermilk for balance, poured into a crust and baked until the top turns golden and crackly over a soft, sweet, almost caramelized interior. That is it. No fruit, no chocolate, nothing that had to be bought special, just what every farm kitchen already had. The name, they say, came from a woman asked what kind of pie it was, who shrugged and said it was Jess's pie, plain pie, nothing pie. And yet it is one of the most satisfying sweets ever made. It was the pie you made when the cupboard was near bare but company was coming. For generations, it anchored Sunday dinners and church suppers across Tennessee. It is still made in some southern kitchens, but for most of America, the humble, brilliant chess pie has been completely forgotten. Number 15, buttermilk pie, Virginia. Close cousin to the chess pie, the buttermilk pie was the Virginia farm wife's answer to the same question. How do you make a wonderful dessert from a nearly empty pantry? When the butter was churned, there was always buttermilk left over, tangy and cheap and plentiful, and rather than waste it, your grandmother turned it into pie. She whisked that buttermilk with sugar, eggs, a little flour, melted butter, and vanilla, poured it into a crust, and baked it until the top browned and the inside set into a smooth, trembling custard with a gentle tang that kept all that sugar from being cloying. The buttermilk gave it a bright, almost lemony edge without a single lemon in the house. It cost pennies and used up what would otherwise be thrown out. Buttermilk pie graced Virginia tables at every family gathering and church homecoming for generations. As home butter churning ended and cultured buttermilk became a thing you rarely bought, the pie faded, one more brilliant, thrifty dessert that most Americans have never had the pleasure of tasting. Number 14, Denver chocolate sheet cake. Colorado. This is the cake so rich that one Colorado church really did ration it to a single square per family at potlucks, because a whole slice was almost too much of a good thing. The Denver chocolate sheet cake was a thin, wide sheet of intensely fudgy chocolate cake, but the magic happened while it was still warm from the oven. Your grandmother would cook up a pourable hot fudge frosting of butter, cocoa, and powdered sugar and pour it over the cake the moment it came out, so it soaked into the top and set into a glossy, dense chocolate shell, half frosting, half candy. Studded with pecans, cut into small squares because that was all anyone could handle, it was the cake for every mountain town gathering, every school event, every neighbor who needed feeding. It cost little and fed 40, which is exactly why church ladies loved it. That combination of warm cake and warm, poured frosting fused into something no layer cake could match. The recipe traveled on index cards across the Rockies for decades, but the specific magic of pouring the frosting hot has slipped away as boxed mixes and canned frosting took over. Number 13, Mississippi mud cake. Mississippi. The Mississippi mud cake got its name because the finished cake looks like the thick, dark mud of the great river's banks, and it is every bit as decadent as that sounds. Your grandmother baked a dense, fudgy chocolate sheet cake, often with pecans mixed right into the batter, and then in the move that made it legendary, she pulled it from the oven while still hot and covered the whole top with a layer of miniature marshmallows. The heat of the cake melted the marshmallows into a gooey, molten blanket. Then, over that, she poured a warm chocolate icing, which swirled into the melting marshmallow to create the marbled, muddy, so irresistible top. Cut into squares, every piece was chocolate, marshmallow, and toasted pecan in one sticky, over-the-top bite. It was Southern potluck royalty, cheap to make and guaranteed to disappear first off any dessert table. It was too sweet, too rich, and absolutely perfect. As from-scratch baking declined across the South, the true Mississippi mud cake, with its hot-poured icing and melting marshmallow, became a treat most young people have only heard their grandparents describe. Number 12, Kringle. Wisconsin. In Racine, Wisconsin, the Danish immigrants built a pastry so beloved that Wisconsin named the Kringle its official state pastry, and one bite explains why. A kringle is a large, flat, oval ring of pastry made from dozens of paper-thin, buttery, flaky layers, a labor of love that takes the better part of 2 days to make properly, with the dough rolled and folded and chilled again and again. Into the center goes a filling, almond paste, pecan, apple, raspberry, or cheese, and the whole ring is baked until shatteringly crisp and golden, then drizzled with a thin white icing. Cut into slices, it flakes apart into buttery shards. For Racine families, a kringle was Sunday morning, a gift for a new neighbor, the centerpiece of every holiday breakfast, always in a familiar white box from one of the old Danish bakeries. Making a true kringle at home was beyond most cooks, so it was a bakery treasure. As the old Danish bakeries dwindled and shipping made 100 imitations available, the real Racine kringle, with its impossible number of hand-laminated layers, became a rarer and more precious thing. Number 11, Peach Pie, Delaware. Most people forget that in the 1800s, Delaware was the peach capital of America. Its orchards so vast that at the peak of the boom, the state shipped millions of baskets a year, and the peach blossom is Delaware's state flower to this day. So it is fitting that Delaware claims the peach pie, and that generations of Delaware grandmothers made it the moment the local peaches came ripe in high summer. Your grandmother would peel and slice those soft, dripping, sun-warm peaches, toss them with just enough sugar and a little flour to hold the juice, and pile them into a crust under a lattice top, dotting them with butter before baking. As it cooked, the peaches collapsed into a fragrant, syrupy, golden filling, and the juices bubbled up through the lattice. Warm from the oven, a slice with the juice still running was summer in a single bite, and when the orchards were free with fruit, the pie cost almost nothing. Blight and development eventually wiped out most of Delaware's great peach orchards, and with them the effortless, local, once-a-year magic of a real Delaware peach pie. Fourth pattern break. We are down to the final 10 now, and these are the heavy hitters, the desserts that whole regions built their identity around. But before we get there, sit with this for a second. Every one of these 10 was, for the people who made it, not just a dessert, but a signature, the thing a grandmother was known for, the recipe that got requested at every gathering, the taste her grandchildren would spend the rest of their lives trying and failing to exactly recreate. That is what a great dessert becomes in a family. Not sugar and butter, but a person. When you smell it, you see her hands. When you taste it, she is in the room again. That is why these matter, and why losing them is losing more than a recipe. It is losing the last direct line to someone who loved you enough to spend a whole day at the stove. Here are the 10 no one should be allowed to forget. Number 10. Peach cobbler, Georgia. Georgia is the peach state, and the peach cobbler is its crown, the dessert that means summer, family, and home across the entire South. When the Georgia peaches came in heavy and sweet and dripping, your grandmother did not fuss with a lattice-top pie. She made cobbler, which was easier, more generous, and better for a crowd. In the classic Georgia way, she melted butter in a deep pan, poured in a simple batter of flour, sugar, and milk, then spooned the sugared, spiced peaches right on top and slid it into the oven. Something wonderful happened as it baked. The batter rose up and around the sinking fruit, so the finished cobbler had a golden, cakey, buttery crust, cradling pockets of hot, jammy peach. The whole kitchen filled with the smell of caramelizing peaches and butter. Served warm in a bowl with vanilla ice cream melting into the syrup, it was the taste of a Georgia July. It fed a big family for pennies when the trees were loaded. Real peach cobbler, made from fresh-picked fruit rather than a can, is still one of the South's greatest gifts, and one too many young cooks now make only from a box. Number 9. Haupia, Hawaii. At every luau, at every family gathering, at the end of every big Hawaiian meal, there was haupia, cut into neat white squares on a platter, and it tasted like the islands themselves. Haupia is a coconut pudding, but firmer than a pudding, almost a soft jelly, made by simmering rich coconut milk with sugar and thickening it with a little cornstarch, or, in the old days, arrowroot, then pouring it into a shallow pan and chilling it until it set firm enough to slice. Cut into cool, wobbling squares, it was pure, clean, sweet coconut, refreshing after a heavy meal of Kahlua pig and rice. Your grandmother, your tutu, made it for every celebration, and the sight of that platter of white squares meant family, aloha, and home. Later, it became a beloved pie filling too, layered under whipped cream. As convenience desserts crept into the islands, simple homemade haupia, made from real coconut milk rather than a mix, became something the older generation quietly worried the younger one would forget how to make. Number 8. Choke Cherry Pie, Wyoming. Out on the high plains and in the draws of Wyoming, the choke cherry grew wild and free, a small, dark, intensely tart wild cherry that puckered your whole face if you ate it raw. The pioneers and the ranch families learned to tame it, and the choke cherry pie was one of their prized rewards. There was a trick to it, though. The pits of the choke cherry are not safe to eat, so your grandmother could never just pile the whole fruit into a crust. Instead, she cooked the choke cherries down and strained out every seed, capturing only that deep, wine-dark, tart-sweet juice, which she thickened and turned into a glossy filling for the pie. The result was unlike any cherry pie from a store, wilder, tarter, more complex, with a flavor that tasted like the open range itself. The fruit was free for anyone willing to fight the birds and the thorns for it. Because choke cherries cannot really be farmed or shipped, the pie never went commercial, and as fewer families put up wild fruit each fall, the Wyoming choke cherry pie became a taste that lives now mostly in the memory of ranch grandmothers. Number 7. Buckeyes, Ohio. In Ohio, home of the Buckeye tree and the Buckeye state pride, the great homemade candy is the Buckeye, and it is engineered to look exactly like the nut it is named for. Your grandmother would make a stiff, sweet dough of peanut butter, butter, and powdered sugar, roll it into little balls, chill them firm, and then dip each one into melted chocolate, but only partway, leaving a circle of peanut butter showing at the top. Set on wax paper to harden, each finished candy looked just like a real Buckeye nut, glossy brown chocolate with a tan eye. They tasted like a homemade peanut butter cup, but better, with that soft center giving way to the snap of chocolate. Buckeyes meant the holidays, and above all, football season, when Ohio families made platters of them to eat while cheering on the team. A batch cost little and made dozens. Buckeyes are still made across Ohio, fiercely and proudly, but for the rest of the country, this clever, delicious little candy remains a regional secret most people have never even seen. Number 6. Smith Island Cake, Maryland. Out on tiny Smith Island in the Chesapeake Bay, the watermen's wives created a cake so extraordinary that Maryland made it the official state dessert, and it is a genuine marvel of patience. A Smith Island cake is not 3 or 4 layers. It is 8, 10, sometimes 12 layers, each one a thin, tender wafer of yellow cake, stacked with a layer of cooked chocolate fudge frosting between every single one. Because the layers are so thin and the frosting is a cooked fudge rather than a fluffy buttercream, it soaks into the cake and firms up, holding all those layers together in a dense, moist, striped tower of chocolate and cake. The legend goes that the wives baked these cakes for their husbands to take on the fall oyster runs because the fudge frosting kept the cake from drying out through long days on the cold water. As the island's population dwindled and hand-baking declined, this astonishing cake, one of America's true regional masterpieces, teetered on the edge of being forgotten until Maryland stepped in to honor it. Number 5. Texas Sheet Cake, Texas. Everything is bigger in Texas, including the cake, and the Texas Sheet Cake is proof. A chocolate cake baked wide and thin in a jelly roll pan so it could feed an entire church, family reunion, or ranch crew from a single batch. Your grandmother started it on the stovetop, bringing butter, water, cocoa, and oil to a boil, then stirring that hot chocolate mixture right into the flour and sugar, which made the batter silky and the cake incredibly moist. It baked fast because it was thin, and then while the cake was still hot from the oven, she made the icing the same way, boiling butter, cocoa, and milk, whisking in powdered sugar and a mountain of chopped pecans, and pouring it over the warm cake so it flowed to every edge and set into a glossy, fudgy top. Cut into dozens of squares, it was chocolate perfection, cheap, fast, and endlessly generous, the reliable crowd pleaser every Texas woman had memorized. It is still made, but the from-scratch, hot-poured original is slowly being crowded out by boxed mixes that miss its whole moist, generous soul. Number 4. Lane Cake, Alabama. In 1998, an Alabama woman named Emma Rylander Lane entered a cake in a county fair, won the prize, and gave the world the Lane Cake, Alabama's grand and boozy pride. It became so central to Southern life that Harper Lee wrote it into To Kill a Mockingbird, where a neighbor's Lane Cake, loaded with liquor, is a small-town event. The cake itself is a tall, tender, white layer cake, but the soul of it is the filling, a rich custard of egg yolks and butter and sugar, cooked slow, then loaded with raisins, chopped pecans, and shredded coconut, and spiked generously with bourbon or whiskey. That filling was spread thick between the layers, and the whole cake was left to sit for days, so the bourbon soaked through and everything mellowed together. This was the cake for Christmas, and for the most important occasions, a cake that took real time and real skill and announced that the family was celebrating something. As from-scratch celebration baking faded across the South, the magnificent boozy Lane Cake became a treasure kept alive by only the most dedicated Alabama grandmothers. Number 3. Shoofly Pie, Pennsylvania. Here is the pie that hides the ingredient modern pastry chefs are rediscovering and charging a fortune for: molasses, specifically the dark, mineral-rich, slightly bitter kind. The Pennsylvania Dutch built the shoofly pie around it, and it is genius born of a pantry with almost nothing in it but flour, sugar, molasses, and lard. Your grandmother poured a layer of molasses custard into the bottom of a crust, then covered it with a thick blanket of crumbs made from flour, brown sugar, and butter, and baked it. As it cooked, the crumbs on top stayed cakey, while some sank into the molasses, and the bottom set into a dense, sticky, almost gooey layer of pure molasses flavor. It was sweet, yes, but with that deep, complex, faintly bitter molasses note underneath that 100 years later, chefs would call sophisticated. The funny name, they say, came from having to shoo the flies away from the sweet molasses as it cooled on the windowsill. It cost almost nothing and needed no fruit, no eggs to speak of, no fresh anything. For generations, it was breakfast and dessert both across Pennsylvania Dutch country, and it remains one of America's most misunderstood and underappreciated pies. Number 2. Sugar Cream Pie, Indiana. Indiana's beloved sugar cream pie is so old and so cherished that it is often called Hoosier pie. And it may be the ultimate desperation dessert, the pie you could make when there was truly almost nothing in the house. There are no eggs in a classic sugar cream pie, no fruit, no chocolate. There is cream, sugar, a little flour or cornstarch to thicken it, butter, and a whisper of vanilla and nutmeg. That is all. Your grandmother, often an Amish or Shaker cook, would stir the cream and sugar and thickener together, sometimes right in the unbaked crust, using nothing but a finger to swirl it so as not to tear the pastry, then bake it until it bubbled and set into a filling that trembled like the softest custard, silky and sweet and simple, with the nutmeg dusted dark across the top. It cost pennies and required no eggs when eggs were scarce. Cool from the counter, it was pure, quiet comfort. Indiana loves it so much, it too became a state pie. But across the rest of the country, this humble, brilliant, eggless pie has been all but forgotten. Number 1. Gooey Butter Cake, Missouri. And at the very top of the list is the dessert that was born from a mistake and became a legend, the St. Louis gooey gooey butter cake. The story, passed down for decades, is that sometime in the 1930s, a St. Louis baker was making a batch of sheck, or coffee cake, and got the proportions wrong, reversing the amounts of two ingredients, adding far too much butter and sugar. The result should have been a failure. Instead, it came out of the oven as something no one had tasted before. A cake with a thin, tender, cakey bottom and a dense, sticky, almost molten top layer that stayed gooey, sweet, and rich, cracked and golden on the surface, dusted with powdered sugar. It was too good to throw out. Word spread, other bakers copied it, and soon every bakery in St. Louis had its own version in the case, sold by the square for pennies. Missouri grandmothers made it for church and for company, and it became the taste of St. Louis itself. A mistake, kept because it was delicious, that fed a city for generations. Beyond Missouri, most Americans have never had a real gooey butter cake, which makes it the most forgotten and the most fitting dessert on this entire list. Here is my challenge. Pick the one from your state and make it this week. The gooey butter cake, the sugar cream pie, the peach cobbler, the Buckeyes. Make the thing your own grandmother would have made without a recipe. Then come back and tell me in the comments which state you are from and which dessert you tried. Because these were never just sweets. They were the last thing your family made with their own hands before the store did it for us. Your grandmother knew them by heart. Now you do too.